Iowans for Tax Relief was founded in 1978 by a longtime legislator named David Stanley. When Dave retired from the legislature after serving as Senate Majority Leader, he remarked that it was always easier for politicians to yield to the noisy special interest group as long as the taxpayer kept quietly paying the bill. With that sentiment in mind, Iowans for Tax Relief still strives to give the taxpayer a voice at the Iowa Capitol, reminding legislators to continue to work for the families and businesses in their districts and not the groups at the Capitol asking for more of your tax dollars. But today is not about ITR, about a primary election that you have coming up right here. Elections have consequences because elected officials decide how to spend your hard-earned income that's collected as taxes. Fortunately, the best taxpayer protection is winning elections, so make sure you vote next month and in November. Today, we have two candidates who are essentially interviewing for the job of representing this district at the Capitol. This is a forum, not a debate. The candidates are speaking directly to you, their constituents, not to each other and not to ITR. We are only here to facilitate a discussion so you all can learn what kind of legislator these candidates hope to be. Here are a few ground rules. Candidates will have a chance to briefly introduce themselves at the start of the event and also provide a brief closing statement after the final forum questions have been asked. Candidates were not provided any questions in advance, but we did send them a topic we plan to discuss. Audience members were encouraged to submit questions ahead of time, and we've tried to incorporate one of those questions that had broad appeal among the voters. Response time for the candidates will be limited to 1.5 minutes per question, and any follow-up questions may be asked at the discretion of ITR. Candidates, when you're running to about 20 seconds left, I will simply hold up this red folder as a notification to you that your time is getting low and please wrap up. When we reach 1.5 minutes, it will come to a hard stop. I'll thank you for your answer and we'll move on. There are no formal rebuttals and we'll rotate the order to whom the questions are asked. Again, candidates, when we wrap up, you'll have a couple minutes to make closing remarks, but before we get to the questions, we'd like each of you briefly to tell the voters a little about yourselves. Porsha, if you would start, take a couple minutes and introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Porsha Hart. I am from Waukee, Iowa. I have 20 years experience in public service in which I've served on the Governor's Advisory Council, also as a Sister Cities Commissioner. I've also served as the co-chair for the United Nations Association of Women. I am pro-life, I am pro-Second Amendment, and I recently received an endorsement from the NRA.
Thank you. Scott?
Well, thank you, Chris, and thanks to the membership of Iowans for Tax Relief for hosting us today. I'm glad to be here, and Porsha, nice to be with you. My name's Scott Cirksena. I was born here, actually in the district. I call it Old West Des Moines now, maybe dating myself a little bit, because most of what was west of us, where we lived, was cornfield. That is definitely not the case today. So it would be really just fun and cool to be able to represent the neighborhood that I grew up in. So graduated from Valley High School and went to what was then Grandview College for my undergraduate degree in pre-law. Then went on to Webster University in Kansas City for my master's degree in management. I served 6 years as a Clive City Council member, and then I'm now currently serving my 11th year as mayor of the city of Clive. And what's been really rewarding about both of those responsibilities has been the opportunity to really kind of serve the greater Des Moines region, regarding initiatives that affect the quality of life of the entire region. So that's been fantastic. I've had a lot of great people to work with, and I would say that from my time and from well before my time, a big part of our interest in the city of Clive and our governance was strong, conservative budgeting principles that are accountable. And I think that we've been able to produce those kinds of results there. That's a skill set that I'd like to take to the Iowa Senate. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, thank you. So we're all aware that we've got the coronavirus and its impact. This being felt all across the country and certainly here in Iowa. Governor Reynolds is trying to protect our health and safety while also being sensitive to the economic impact of those prevention efforts. What is Iowa getting right? And what else should we consider doing during this pandemic? Scott, you answer this one first.
Thank you, Chris. Serving in my current role as mayor, one of the things that we're really trying to do is make sure that we're communicating and planning very well not only locally, but then with our county and state health officials in the governor's office to receive that guidance and to work with that guidance. And then really what you end up doing is try to plan around every what if scenario with your employees and with your residents to keep everybody safe. I think the governor has worked very hard to strike a balance between protecting our residents and then ultimately opening up our economy in a slow metered fashion. But the real work will be ahead of us as we work to budget, as we work to carry us into the 2021 budget year, and as we work to really be mindful and keep our fingers on the tabs of the coronavirus and the daily caseload. So a lot to do, but I think all of our leaders have done an outstanding job thus far, and we need to stay the course.
Great, thank you. Porsha, what is Iowa getting right? What else should we consider doing during this pandemic?
Thank you, Chris. At this time, Iowa is getting right, slowly opening back up the economy, considering the cases that have occurred during this pandemic. We are not totally in the clear, so by the governor slowly opening up the counties, I think that was a really great move in that it did keep our constituents in mind. However, an opportunity of growth is that as businesses are opening up, how are the constituents prepared to go back to work from a mental health perspective, even taking care of their families? What are they going to do for childcare, education, etc.? Moreover, what measures do business owners have in place? Because we're not in the clear, and we don't know if another month or 2 months down the road if we have to shut down again. So also preparing the businesses to come up with a strategic plan for just in case we have to shut down again.
Great, thank you. In 2010, Iowans voted in favor of the creation of the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund, which dedicates 3/8% of the next sales tax increase to water quality, though that tax increase has never been implemented. This year, the governor proposed the Invest in Iowa Act, which would change how dollars are spent on natural resources while increasing the sales tax a full penny, reducing the property tax levy for mental health, and reducing income tax rates. How would you view legislation similar to what the governor proposed? Porsha?
I strongly support the governor's tax swap. I support increasing taxes as long as there is an equal decrease. And so by using a penny from the taxes to be used towards mental health and other needs within our states and offsetting that, I think that it is a move that will help keep money in our constituents' pockets instead of us constantly paying out taxes.
Scott, how would you view a plan like the governor has proposed?
Well, I think it's a pretty reasonable plan. I think anytime you talk about a sales tax, which inherently is one that says to me that Iowans don't have to bear the entire burden of that tax to help us get to the end state that we want to get to. In this case, it's the trust fund, it's water quality, it's a number of things that come from that, including top income tax rates by the time this is all phased out in the plan. So I think it's a pretty good start. I think it's a great message. I think it's sound fundamentally. We just have to make sure that the details are right. And as it relates to the Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund, as you stated, Chris, this was passed by the voters in 2010. It's incumbent upon us to work hard to figure out a way to fund this and honor the will of the voters. So I think it's a great start, and we look forward to be a part of that solution.
Property taxes that fund cities, counties, and schools remain the issue that ITR members care about more than any other. For instance, senior citizens have told us their property tax bills go up faster than their Social Security checks do. And business owners have told us they pay more property taxes in Iowa than our neighboring states. How would you address these types of concerns around property taxes? Scott?
Well, property taxes, like any other tax, it tends to be more complicated than it should. There are multiple aspects to it. You have city levies, you have county levies, you have school levies, you have property tax levels or rates that are set by the county based on state code. So you have a whole lot of moving parts as part of the property tax system. And what we saw in this last cycle with really dramatic increases in property tax assessments really confused the issue of what is actually happening. So I say that, and then I'm gonna move over to the fact that property taxes are really, really difficult to manage. Our state has utilized the property tax system for a long time. It's pretty difficult to try to find a way to get away from it. But inherently, we have to work to find creative ways to move away from a system that depends on property taxes alone.
Great. Porsha, how would you address voter concerns about property taxes?
Chris, I am concerned about what the constituents are concerned about, keeping money in their pockets. Therefore, I do not support a tax increase for property taxes, and I do not support property taxes being put on autopilot either.
The next question was submitted by a few of the voters in your district. Porsha, you'll get this one first. What responsibility, if any, do you believe state government has in ensuring everyone has a livable income?
Well, I do believe that the state has a responsibility to make sure that all constituents, all residents have a reasonable living. Even when I was out campaigning, many of the constituents who live in Waukee, their concern was that can we still afford to live here? And so I believe that the state has a responsibility to make sure that there's a livable wage and that everyone has an opportunity to improve their life through different initiatives that can prepare individuals to become business owners if they choose, or continue to go on to college and things of that nature, so that they too can have a good and thriving life, not just for themselves, but for the generations to come also.
Great. Scott, state's responsibility on ensuring everyone has a livable income.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. This has been a hotly debated issue for some time, as you know. And I'm fundamentally from the mindset of lesser government in scenarios that involve our residents and our citizens. The marketplace really drives demand for what that livable wage happens to be. $15 is kind of the number that has come out of this most recent debate over the last couple of years. But I do think the state does have a role in that you're going to have to be able to work with counties and different market demographics to make some determinations. Because if you don't, then you have different wage rates spread throughout the state, minimum wage levels set throughout the state. And that can create a whole different set of issues. So is it solely the state's responsibility? No, but I think that the legislature needs to be involved, certainly with that, to keep it manageable for our taxpayers.
Health and Human Services is the second largest expenditure within the state budget and one of the fastest growing expenditures within the state budget. How can the legislature rein in those costs while still delivering services? And are there changes that need to be made to mental health delivery in Iowa? Scott, you're first.
Well, this is a big one. Certainly the subject of mental health particularly has come up over the last couple of years, pointing out that we really have a very limited delivery system within the state of Iowa to reach out and touch those that really need help in neighborhoods, people that are our friends and neighbors that have acute issues that need to be addressed. When the Mercy Mental Health Hospital started to come to Clive and we started to work with them to develop that project, it became very clear that public-private investment is going to be required for us to be able to reach out and touch people of all ages, but particularly children that need help in the mental health arena. So the state's got to be involved, and probably now and going forward more than ever.
Porsha, how can the legislature rein in those costs while still delivering these key services? And are there changes that need to be made to mental health delivery in Iowa?
I believe one solution would be to look at the line items on the budget and see what agencies could be trimmed, and the money can be switched to a different agency to make sure that all needs are met fairly. Also, mental health in the state of Iowa is a critical need. According to the National Association of Mental Illness, we currently are rated as a D. So yes, we need to balance the budget, if that is rearranging some things to make sure that everything is taken care of and that we have funding, sufficient funding and support for mental illness, then I think that that needs to be done, because we are in a critical position. And considering that we are in the midst of a pandemic and we don't know how long we're going to be in this pandemic, we are going to encounter individuals within our districts who are having mental health challenges, whether it be anxiety, depression, including children. People are going back to work in these type of conditions, and the majority of individuals and business owners are not prepared. Thank you.
Thank you. Porsha, this one will be to you first. The Iowa legislature passed our state's first income tax reform package in 20 years in 2018. Talk about how an improved income tax code can benefit Iowa and what additional tax reform should be enacted in the future.
Well, Chris, I'm gonna be honest with you. I do not know the tax codes by law. That is an area by like the back of my hand. That is an area of growth for me that I am willing and ready to learn more about. And so once I am able to make a more informed and educated response on that, then I will do so.
Okay. Scott, can you talk about how an improved income tax code benefits Iowa and what additional tax reform should be enacted in the future?
Well, I think anytime that you reduce individual or corporate income taxes, you invite a heightened level of investment. It increases economic activity. It benefits our families and our businesses. So as we model after the 2018 reform, and as we start to lower the top rates, as we start to cut individual income taxes on an average of 10% by 2021, we know that those are going to have direct benefits to the state of Iowa, but first and foremost to our citizens. So anytime you kind of create that environment, you're inviting economic activity and investment. I think as far as specifics, in addition to what's occurring in the 2018 reform program, you know, that has to be phased out. And so I think really our first priority is to ensure that these levels that were included in the reform package are funded appropriately, and that we can play out the full intent of the reform law.
Great. And Scott, staying with you, in that same 2018 reform, there was a call for a more strenuous review of tax credits. Now, supporters of business tax credits believe they're a valuable part of the tax code and they provide a large return on investment. Opponents believe they're a form of corporate welfare that allows the government to pick winners and losers. How do you view business tax credits?
Well, I think that business tax credits have to be, or tax credits of any kind, really need to be reviewed and consistently be reviewed. It has shown, over time and over history that tax credits can be very, very helpful. In different areas, and it's not just business. It could be in the areas of philanthropy. It could be, in the areas of community improvement. And so it touches a whole lot of areas, and it's not just business. So I think we have to be very, very mindful of what the purpose of the tax credits are, and that we need to look at them and review them on a regular basis and determine, really what's providing benefit to the state and to our residents and which ones aren't. But you certainly can't say all tax credits are bad or all tax credits are good. We have to do our job and determine which ones are and which ones aren't.
Porsha, how do you view business tax credits?
I believe the business tax credits are a catch-22. I believe that they are beneficial, like any type of tax credit, that it should be managed well. Really good oversight, and that it should be fair across the board. I do not believe that corporate businesses from other states who come to Iowa because they know we're first in the nation and we have a wonderful way of living here, that they should get more than those hardworking Iowans who live here, who are invested in the communities here, and who intend to stay here.
Education spending is the largest part of the state's budget. How can the legislature work to improve K-12 education in Iowa? And how do you view the state's funding of education? Porsha, we'll start with you.
Well, I believe that education funding, that it is essential. I do not believe that we should increase taxes to maintain that, but I do believe that we need to be innovative. Even with our approach with our education system, considering the challenges that we're facing now with this pandemic again, that we're going to have to really explore more of a mixed methods approach to education in our state, which also includes individuals who are homeschooled and those who will be attending school online also.
Scott, how about you? How can the legislature work to improve K-12 education in Iowa? And how do you view the state's funding of education?
Well, it's a great question. I think we could all be here a long time talking about this one, but
you've got a minute and a half.
I got a minute and a half, and the clock is ticking. So obviously, it's the largest percentage of the state budget is allocated to education, and Iowa's done pretty well in the last 10 years or so in terms of its graduation rates, in terms of its K-12 investment. Really, and I think number 2 in the nation since 07-08 in terms of overall investment. Where I'm coming from on this issue is that we need to continue to get the fundamentals right and continue to do the fundamentals right. My question is, and as a person who lives in the Waukee School District, for example, a district based on its size will grow ad infinitum in all of our lifetimes here on this screen. Beyond our lifetimes, rather, we're adding 500 kids a year. So as a taxpayer, I say, what is that? What's the impact to me as a taxpayer, with both of my kids having gone through that system? So I think that really it's going to take, I think, a lot of stakeholders coming together, figuring out creative and bold solutions. We've proven that we can make the investments. Now we just need to figure out how we're going to fund it at the right level going forward.
Sticking on that topic of education, Scott, do you believe Iowa parents have enough options when it comes to K-12 education? Are there additional programs or alternatives you would consider?
I don't have an opinion on that, Chris, at this point in time. I grew up in the public education system. I had a lot of friends that went to private schools as well. And those are really kind of the two platforms that I've been familiar with and have grown up with in my lifetime. There may be other opportunities there, and I look forward to having those kinds of conversations with, knowledgeable stakeholders about, what could be different, what could be new and upcoming as we work to adapt in this changing world of education.
Porsha, do you believe there's enough options for Iowa parents, or do you believe that there are additional programs or alternatives we should consider for K through 12 education?
Chris, as a former educator myself, I do believe that it is time for us to explore other options regarding education. We are doing great, but the reality is that we have to be prepared for the unexpected. And we also have to consider the concerns of parents who will be returning, whose children will be returning to school in the upcoming school year. Will they want to take their children back to a physical building, whether it be public school or private school? Will more parents be homeschooling? Will they want to their children to attend school online? These are options that we really need to consider, and also be willing to support parents who choose to explore and pursue other options for their family.
Shifting to a different type of education, Porsha, the Regents institutions, that's Iowa, Iowa State, and the University of Northern Iowa, are facing looming budget shortfalls as a result of COVID-19. What role do these institutions have in our state, and what would you do to address the projected revenue issue?
Wow, they have a vital role in our state. I do think that we need to really explore as many options as possible to make sure that they are funded sufficiently without increasing taxes for our constituents, but also still, supporting those organizations.
Scott, how do you view the role that our Regents institutions have in our state, and what would you do with their projected revenue issue?
Well, the role is significant. Obviously, each of those universities are a huge part of our heritage and part of our system that makes the state of Iowa a great state, truly. They are going to have revenue shortfalls like a lot of industries are and a lot of systems are that we're going to have to address. And so I think it's going to be getting the right stakeholders around the table and figuring out what the right thing is to do. Usually the tendency is to raise tuition rates, and that might not be a viable option. We're really, with coronavirus, we're starting with a brand new slate here in terms of how we approach things. So I think we have to get ourselves in the frame of mind that we're starting with a clean slate in many of these areas, and be prepared to go after these issues. But it's going to take some time to do that, for sure.
Governor Reynolds signed a workforce development bill that had broad bipartisan support in 2018. The bill intends to address a workforce skills gap that prevents many employers from expanding their operations further. What are some ways to prepare Iowa's workforce for a tech-heavy 21st century economy? Scott?
Well, workforce is a huge issue for sure. I think that, to your point, if we know and understand where the gaps are, that we get on the gaps and figure out a way to get our workforce trained. We've got one of the most ready workforces in the country. I believe at number 6. I think that's correct. The last that I read, anyway. So it's a big issue for us. I think we also are now having the conversations about the skilled trades and the gaps there, and that's a big gap. It's a gap in the areas that I serve in the private sector, and we need to be comfortable having the conversations about what's right for our kids as they're growing up. Is it a 4-year college degree, or is it going into the skilled trades, which includes tech-heavy areas? But I think we've got to boldly pursue those areas and make sure that we're providing the training, the programming, and the direction necessary for the next generation of workers and beyond in the state of Iowa.
Porsha, how would you address developing a workforce for the 21st century?
Mhm. I would take that approach by starting as far as early as kindergarten on up, preparing children for technology type of jobs, and even encouraging students once they get into high school, junior high, to consider going into more tech heavy fields so that they can implement those skills within our workforce and incentivize them for staying. That way we won't have to outsource our workforce and keep everything not only US based, but also Iowa and district specific based also.
Thank you. Last question before we let you both offer your closing remarks. And Porsha, that you'll start this one. Cities and counties can hire contract lobbyists that aren't subject to open records laws like other public employees. Do you believe there should be more transparency when tax dollars are being spent on lobbying?
Absolutely, transparency across the board, whether it's a lobbyist, a legislator, we need transparency and accountability. Absolutely.
Scott, do you believe there should be more transparency when tax dollars are spent on lobbying?
Absolutely, whether it's on lobbying or on anything else, transparency is absolutely critical. And yeah, I'm very, very supportive of that. And that's something that we always need to be mindful of.
So that concludes all the questions for our candidates. But before we go, we'd like each of them to take a couple minutes to offer any closing remarks that they wish to make. Scott?
Well, thank you, Chris. And again, my thanks to you and your membership for hosting Porsha and myself today. It's been great to answer questions and share with you. I would say that, you know, my history as a proven leader in this district with really conservative budgeting practices and a record to back that up makes me a great candidate for Iowa Senate seat number 22, district number 22. And it would be my honor and privilege to be able to serve that district in the Iowa Senate. Thank you, Chris.
Great. Porsha?
Thank you, Chris and Scott, and to the constituents that are listening. I really appreciate you all for offering us this opportunity, and that I want everyone to know that I bring a fresh perspective to the district. I have a heart for Iowa. I am willing to do the work to make sure that the constituents' voices are not only heard, but there are policies in place that support the core values of our constituents, what matters to them most. I do not believe in raising taxes where there is not an equal decrease, and that I am the candidate that has a heart for Iowa and for the constituents.
Great. Thank you, everyone, candidates and voters. We're honored to serve as the voice of the taxpayer, and Iowans for Tax Relief appreciates the participation in this forum by everyone. The forum was recorded, and we'll be posting it to our website and sharing it with ITR members in the Senate District early next week. So everybody stay safe and have a great weekend.
Thanks to all of you.
Likewise. Bye.